Good morning to everyone. It is a great joy to take part in this experience during this week of learning. My name is Edmeya Santos. I am a full professor at the Federal Rural University of Rio de Janeiro. The theme I have chosen for today is meant to guide our conversation about intersectionality, cyberculture, and artificial intelligence. I will share with you some of my concerns, as well as creations that emerge from this bricolage between the contemporary culture of our time, which in Brazil we approach as an interdisciplinary field called cyberculture, intersectionality, which for us is not only a social theory but also an analytical tool, and how all of this is being impacted by the use of generative artificial intelligence. The notion of intersectionality is not new. It was coined over 30 years ago by the lawyer and civil rights advocate Kimberly Crenshaw. Working in the field of law, she invites us to look at social, cultural, and socio-technical phenomena through an intersectional lens. And what does that mean? It means understanding that when we analyze the world around us, we need to recognize how patterns of power and privilege operate. We must consider how gender, race, class, and other social markers intersect, and how these intersections are often used to produce and sustain inequalities. This also means we cannot separate the development of capitalism from the multiple forms of oppression, whether based on gender, race, class, or sexuality. From this perspective, capitalism is deeply connected to patriarchy and to structural racism. In my own work, intersectionality is not only a social theory, it is above all an analytical tool. It helps us, especially in the field of learning technologies and education, to understand how different forms of oppression are reproduced within technological and educational processes shaped by capitalism. But it's not just about identifying these patterns, it's about questioning them, challenging them, exposing them, and most importantly, fighting against these systems of oppression that are deeply interconnected. Because for capitalism to function as it does, it requires the reinforcement of patriarchal, racist, sexist, ableist, and other exclusionary practices, all of which are deeply embedded in the structures of this system. Some of my main references are the scholars Carla Acotirin from Brazil and Patricia Hill Collins from the United States. Both discuss the notion of intersectionality with great depth and rigor. Carla Acotirin has a well-known book in Brazil titled Intersectionality, in which she offers a comprehensive literature review of the concept, engaging with authors from Latin America, Africa, and also North America. Patricia Hill Collins is one of the most prominent social scientists worldwide, and her work is also translated and widely read in Brazil. I would also like to mention Wayne Bueno, who wrote a dissertation that explores one of Patricia Hill Collins' key concepts, a concept that I will bring into this conversation today, particularly in relation to the uses of generative artificial intelligence. One of the key concepts developed by Patricia Hill Collins is the notion of controlling images. These are socially constructed stereotypes designed to justify and maintain systems of oppression, especially against Black women. Controlling images are not random. They are intentional representations that reduce individuals and entire communities to narrow, distorted identities. They serve to naturalize racism, sexism, classism, and other forms of oppression by making inequality appear normal, inevitable, or even deserved. For example, Collins highlights how the media, institutions, and cultural narratives produce recurring images of Black women, the mammy, the welfare queen, the Jezebel, the angry Black woman, each serving a specific function in maintaining racist and sexist structures. In this conversation about generative artificial intelligence, the concept of controlling images becomes highly relevant. These AI systems are trained on massive amounts of data that reflect the same biased representations and stereotypes. Therefore, if we do not apply an intersectional critical lens, AI can easily reproduce and even amplify these controlling images, further entrenching social inequalities in digital environments. In another context, a group of artists asked a generative AI to create images of perfect men and perfect women. The results revealed how the AI reproduces highly problematic and exclusionary beauty standards. The images overwhelmingly showed white people with Eurocentric features, slim bodies for women, hypermuscular bodies for men, and characteristics aligned with Western ideals of beauty. This experiment highlights how AI systems are trained on datasets that reflect colonial, capitalist, and patriarchal norms. When asked to imagine perfection, the AI defaults to reproducing patterns that exclude Black people, Indigenous peoples, fat bodies, disabled bodies, and anyone who does not fit into these narrow Eurocentric standards. Once again, we see how AI does not simply generate images, but it generates controlling images. It reinforces systems of oppression through aesthetics, representation, and visibility. In collaborative research with my students, we identified several Black women artists whose work exposes the racial biases embedded in artificial intelligence. Their experiments reveal how AI often associates success, power, and wealth with lighter skin tones. When prompted with terms like successful person or best job, the AI consistently generates white Eurocentric images. AI does not create from nothing, it reproduces the world as it is, shaped by racism, colonialism, patriarchy, and capitalism. The Black women whose work I find inspirating are Joy Bolamwini, founder of the Algorithmic Justice League, AJL, creator of the documentary Coded Bias. Her research investigates how facial recognition systems systematically fail to accurately detect Black faces, especially Black women. Stephanie Dinkins, an artist who creates AI-based projects centered on Black communities, addressing issues of memory, ancestry, and technology. Her work explores how communities of color interact with emerging technologies and questions who gets to participate in technological futures. Netris Gaskins, an artist who uses machine learning to generate Afrofuturist art, critically examining how AI reproduces racist aesthetic norms. Her work bridges technology, cultural heritage, and creative practice to propose new futures rooted in Black and diasporic experiences. Mimi Onuoha, an artist and researcher whose projects focus on missing data and the systematic erasure of racialized communities within technological systems. Her work interrogates the ways in which power, absence, and representation operate within data-driven societies. In light of these issues raised by the concept of controlling images, which are also produced and amplified by generative AI, our research group, Docencia Cyberculture, has been deeply engaged in intersectional practices. Our work is not only about identifying, denouncing, and critiquing the racist, sexist, and classist patterns embedded in AI systems. It is also about exploring how AI can be used through an intersectional and qualitative perspective as a tool for narrative justice, self-definition, and knowledge production. In this context, another concept from Patricia Hill Collins becomes especially meaningful for us: the idea of self-definition, or what we call image control, which stands in opposition to controlling images. With this in mind, we are developing methodologies with our students that leverage AI to tell our own stories, narratives of life, education, and identity. We are working with autofiction, digital diaries, ubiquitous walks, and other creative practices that aim to produce more just, plural, and multi-referential knowledge. This is our way of resisting dominant narratives and reclaiming the power of representation in the digital age. As an example of positive uses of artificial intelligence, now aligned with the concept of image control, I present here two magazine covers that we created. These covers depict people of different races, ethnicities, and social classes working together in discussions about pedagogy and teacher training to confront neoliberal reforms, many of which involve the use of generative artificial intelligence. The covers reflect plurality and difference rather than stereotypes rooted in patriarchal, classist, racist, and capitalist power structures. Another teaching example that I really appreciate is Professor Giselle Beigelman, who is a professor at the University of Sao Paulo in the Department of Architecture and Urbanism. She leads the project Tyrannical Botany, Botanica Tyrannica, in which she recreates and renames images of plants that have also been treated in a racist manner. She uses artificial intelligence to do this. This work not only generated a pedagogical practice reflecting on intersectionality within architecture and urbanism, but it also resulted in an artwork itself exhibited and discussed in various museums around the world. Giselle is an important professor and artist who combines her artistic practice with her research and teaching, producing highly thought provoking work. It is a project I value and admire greatly. All of this also leads us to reflect on ethical issues, especially the ethics of using generative artificial intelligence in educational practices. In this regard, Professor Lucia Santella, an important Brazilian researcher, created an ethical manual for the use of generative AI. In this dossier, she interviewed me, and among various questions, she asked me 10 questions. I took one of these questions and asked generative AI to provide an answer. The question and prompt were, what are the positive and negative aspects, that is, the pros and cons of using generative AI in educational contexts? The generative AI responded by presenting both positive and negative aspects. I agreed with all the negative aspects it raised, but disagreed with the positive ones. Its answers were extremely instructional and technicist, which does not align with the educational practices in cyberculture that we have been developing, practices involving online education, collaborative learning and teaching, virtual learning environments, communities of practice, among other points that we have been discussing for nearly 30 years in Brazil, especially in Portuguese. The ethical manual organized by Professor Lucia Santaella, titled Ethical Manual for the Use of Generative Artificial Intelligence, is available in the TechCogs Journal from PUCSP. This special issue, Voler 28, 2023, gathers articles, interviews, and dossiers addressing the ethical implications of using generative AI in education and society. Among the highlights of this issue is the interview that Professor Lucia Santaella conducted with you, Edmea Santos, titled A Multi-Referential View of Education and Technology. In this conversation, topics such as intersectionality, cyberculture, and the role of generative AI in education are discussed. Returning to the answers that the generative AI provided to my question about the positive and negative aspects, regarding the negative aspects, the AI mentioned several important points. Algorithmic bias is a major problem, and I agree with that, especially since the examples presented here clearly reveal racism and sexism. This is also caused by the fact that most creators are white urban men from the global north, so it is very important that we broaden the training of new technology producers. Another negative aspect brought up was technological dependency, which I also agree with. Increasingly, we are tied to the use of technologies to produce, including academic and didactic production. This technological dependency has caused some discomfort. For example, there are teachers who cannot pass public service exams without technological mediation in their writing. So technological dependency is indeed a negative aspect. Privacy and data security issues are also negative aspects, and we agree with these points raised by the AI, since algorithms and bots scan and listen to our messages and collect our data when we register. Lastly, the dehumanization of learning processes is another problem, often caused by the use of artificial tutors and automation technologies that are replacing teachers, tutors, mediators, and educational advisors in different contexts, especially in distance education settings. Regarding the positive aspects that the AI presented to me, the first was personalized learning. I am strongly opposed to this concept because I understand that each person learns within a context, within a community, and through diverse formative environments. In formal education, the more collaborative the experiences are, the more meaningful they become. I deeply believe in what Vygotsky taught us about zones of proximal development, where cognitive and socio-emotional differences become mediators and potentials for learning. Positioning personalized learning as the first positive aspect of AI use reinforces technicist and neoliberal practices that we are already seeing through standardized packages and closed curricula targeted at each individual. The second aspect that AI presented as positive was the creation of educational resources. I do enjoy creating educational resources using technologies, and that includes AI. However, I find it symptomatic that the focus is placed on resource creation rather than on building communities of practice, interactive classrooms where resources are created and co created by the entire community. Another aspect that AI suggested as positive was the automation of feedback. This point requires careful consideration. Intelligent tutors powered by AI have been automating feedback processes, but they fail to guarantee what is essential to authentic educational practices, as Paulo Freire taught us, such as narrative disputes, valuing conflicts, and fostering the power of argumentation from different perspectives. All of this becomes neutralized and underdeveloped when the curriculum is personalized and relies on automated resources. The last positive aspect mentioned was access and expansion of education. I disagree with this as well. Education only truly expands through the creation of collectives, not merely through the mass distribution of instructional scripts. Therefore, these so called positive aspects do not satisfy me, even though I recognize that they might be useful in some contexts. However, they are not adequate for our country, Brazil, a nation with continental dimensions where a large part of the population is still excluded from social processes. What we urgently need is to increasingly value our public schools and universities. To conclude this presentation, this text highlights the need for great care when using generative artificial intelligences, considering that their developers and broader society itself are still deeply shaped by patriarchal, white, capitalist, and urban power structures. The examples shared here are quite eloquent in demonstrating this. On the other hand, we have also presented counterexamples, control images versus image control, showing possibilities within both the fields of art and education. Our commitment is to use generative artificial intelligences in ways that are anti-racist, anti-sexist, and anti-capitalist, because the 21st century challenges us profoundly. This is especially urgent as our states and nations increasingly flirt with the rise of fascist far-right movements. That's all. Education can and must be a space for freedom, democratic practices, and, above all, respect for differences in all their forms, including when mediated by technology. Thank you very, very much.